We are getting ready for part two of our evening broadcasting. We've got Mark Zaid coming up here shortly. So I hope you're ready because we've got a lot going on. And that's right. Ain't no stopping us now. We gotta have theme music on a Friday night. I couldn't think of what good music goes with Illegal Eagle, but if you got Legal Eagle music, let me know. I know this is what I listen to. In fact, someone sent me some music the other day, and none of it fits what I listen to. I have 9,000 CDs, and there's a lot of stuff that do not fit my style. And yet, I love funk and R&B anyway. So that is what it is. We, the people of the United States of America, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, and ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense. These words are, thank you, that was always said about me. These words don't randomly come out of nowhere. Despite the problems of the obvious founders, slaveholders, three-fifths compromise, people often say, thank a soldier for your freedom. I can understand and respect that. But I'm strongly of the opinion, if you really like your freedoms, thank a lawyer. Our founders had lawyers amongst them. There are some fantastic cases from the very beginning of folks who took the law and the protection of civil liberties extremely seriously. And I think that is really kind of why I wanted to bring on my friend Mark Zaid, who we haven't hosted before. He knows me mostly from my Facebook friendship for many, many years over there. So he sees what I do, but I totally know what he does. And I know that Mark is a unique, in my opinion, hero to American freedom. And I wrote a piece today to honor the work I believe that he's should be most noted for. And the piece is called "The Lawyer, the President Who Tried to Silence Him, and Why the Courts Stopped Him." And when he comes on a bit, and we got a little time, I want him to tell you about this ongoing case with Donald Trump trying to weaponize clearances. And since we were last on a little while ago, air raid here in Kyiv has gone off. This is based on ballistics, by the way. It's not just drones. So you're talking to one of the only hosts here that simultaneously does so while being at the top of the building, not in a shelter. I'm crazy like that. And focused, crazy focused, laser-like. These cases matter. What's happening with the weaponization of the intelligence agencies, law enforcement, and Department of Justice is not the only problem. Trying to prevent lawyers like Mark from being able to do their job is a threat to national security. It's not merely an inconvenience. There are consequences of, for instance, not protecting whistleblowers who have to be heard and understood, and their rights protected. And I know that there will probably be areas that we I hope, learn some valuable lessons tonight. And I'm very, I grew up with a paralegal mom who, until recently, I thought my mom just didn't love me. I thought my mom was so absorbed. I said to my stepdad, I always felt like, maybe I wasn't as important. And my stepdad said very clearly, man, I wasn't important either. Your mom worked all the damn time, and all I know is she loved that law firm. And if she'd get up in the morning and she'd go to work and she'd come. So both of us were not important compared to the work that my paralegal mom did at Vincent Elkins and then at Spagnoletti and Associates. And I respect her. She came of a generation, as her boss said, after she died. My mom died at 66 years old of cancer, pancreatic cancer. And I got on the phone with her boss afterwards, Frank, and I said, Frank Spagnoletti. And I said, thank you for taking care of my mom all those last years when she was still working. He says, they don't make them like that anymore. Everyone's career oriented, trying to climb up a ladder to some sort of success. And that, that sort of like, the dad that goes to the factory and all that stuff. It's a really distinct type of generation that is lost, but there are still some folks who do this that are really amazing. And I posted on Facebook earlier to my friends, if you said lawyer to me, I usually go, what kind? I've had more than enough people come up to me and say, I'm a lawyer. I go, okay, yeah. And what? What kind of lawyer are you? Typically they're not the kind of lawyer that's about to threaten me with whatever they're about to come out of their mouth. They're gonna saber rattle that they're a lawyer and then find out like, you're a contract lawyer or you're a, immigration lawyer or something that's not in the category that's issuing the threat. Why did I know that? Because I used to, when I was a little child, I say used to, it was a long time ago. I'm 56. I hear air defense, by the way. Again, if you are triggered by air defense and the option that your host may be killed mid-broadcast, you're at the right place. So I grew up writing on the back of depositions. I used to do court running for the law firm, and I learned a lot over the years about how the process works and some really fine-tuned details that as I've grown up as a person doing journalism. Hey, man, telling our crowd about the beauty of lawyers. I said, if you want to thank you everyone for your rights, people used to say, thank a soldier, and I appreciate that. But I always said, if you really like the rights you have, thank a lawyer, from our founder level to today. And lo and behold, one of the guys I know who does this best is right here with us, doing exactly that kind of work. How are you, man?
Hey, I'm awesome. I'm just trying to figure out how best to put my phone.
Yeah, take your time. Take your time. So,
But
one of the things I was saying is like my mom was a paralegal for two firms, Spagnoletti and Associates in the last part, but Vincent Elkins, the great Vincent Elkins, V&E of Houston, and paralegals. My mom's last boss said, well, there's not a lawyer in town that doesn't respect your mom. They might not like her, but they respect her. She was the head chief paralegal, and that meant that she did all this amazing, like, critical work in the background, fine-tuned notes, and made sure all the stuff came together, and the real ninja at the paperwork. But I learned a lot doing that, and so when I read articles about law, I feel like there's a little bit of a step up, and even more so, a deep appreciation of the process that goes into all of this. It's not very well thought out in the public sector. And number two is I really appreciate you being in here on Substack. I watch you and Brian Karem on a regular basis, having
yeah,
amazing
I always
conversations.
wonder who the hell watches that.
Crazy people in war. We also have an air raid going on. We have ballistics going on in the background. So
Lovely.
fun. And we got a little moment. We have our friends joining us too. We got some. Let me put up the second screen so I can see their commentary as well.
There we go.
And our friends say some amazing things as they're watching. And so one of the things that I was writing this piece about you, and I said that it kept changing. I'm like, okay, good. They rolled it back, and the DOJ is not gonna. Apparently, are gonna do it. So let's talk about this main case that's in the news this week with you guys, and for the viewers who may not know what's been going on, would you mind overviewing kind of this legalization of this attack on the legal process that you work in and what the consequences are? But how did we get to this in the last year where the Trump administration weaponized this side of your work, this retaliation move?
It was. I don't think it was a long time coming. It was very methodic and set forth. I think anybody who'd been paying attention would know this was coming. I mean, look, Project 2025, they spelled it all out. We knew from when the election happened in November of 2025 that we were going to prepare for all this type of retaliatory actions. The very first day when a number of my clients, predominantly CIA, were targeted with their security clearances being revoked, who had signed the Hunter Biden laptop letter back in 2020.
Right.
And I want to say 51 people, 2 of them had already passed away. So 49 people had their clearances revoked, even though most of them, as is the case for the majority of the almost or more than 100 people who have had their security clearances revoked in the last year, they didn't have a clearance at the time it was revoked. Some of them, I don't think ever had a clearance. But
Mhm.
for mine, when I learned of it the first time, because 3 times they announced they were going to revoke it
Mhm.
in February, March, and April of last year. When I learned for the first time in February, I was at a wedding of a colleague, and the New York Post ran a story, and I started getting calls, and text messages from friends and journalists, and friends were like, "I'm so sorry to hear what happened," and I was like, "I don't know what you're
What
talking
happened?
about. What happened? It's like 6 o'clock on a Saturday night." And they're like,
Wow.
"The president just revoked your security clearance." So literally at the wedding during the cocktail hour, I write out a statement that I issue to the press. And I ended the statement with, I called it one, my red badge of courage as to what
Mhm.
just happened. And
Mhm.
I ended the statement literally with, "And what took you so long?" Because it was so obvious that this was forthcoming.
Right, right.
Now, who did it in the sense of, like, whose shit list am I on? Do I think the president of the United States, you know, really knows my name?
That occurred to me when I was writing this piece about you is why Mark, I mean, I know a lot about what your work is, but it seems like it would be very, outside of Trump's interest lane.
Well, right, you look at the list of the individuals who I am grouped with, and you named a bunch of them, or maybe even all of them. It's about 15, 16 people. There's a theme there. For one thing,
Mhm.
every one of those names is really well known, except for mine.
Mhm.
And all of them, except for mine, were either senior government officials, either elected as members of Congress like Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger, or appointed into positions as senior folks within the government. Former FBI general counsels, former ethics czars in the White House. Everybody was politically connected in some way, shape, or form other than me. I was the
Right.
only lawyer who functioned as a lawyer. I mean, Norm Eisen was on the list, is on the
Right.
list. I was his lawyer. He's my lawyer. But Norm is a political guy, right? I mean,
Right.
he was involved with the impeachment proceedings as a lawyer for the Democrat. He was Obama's chief ethics czar in the White House. I don't do any of that. I'm a registered independent, have been so my entire voting life.
Amen.
I have
Same here.
I've never worked for the federal government until literally the last few years. I did not even donate money to candidates because I didn't want to be, I'll say, tainted with air quotes. I didn't want to be put into a category of who it was that I was supporting. Although the reality is the only people I generally have supported until recently, because of what's going on,
Mhm.
were friends. I mean, friends of mine who ran for Congress. So yeah, here's
Right.
$100, some small amount or something like that. But this I resonate or exemplify the Shakespearean quote from Henry VI. The first thing we do is kill all the lawyers. Because
Right.
the reason why, even though that quote is generally viewed, and you referenced it in your article, which was fantastic.
Like,
You referenced it because Judge Howell, in one of the law firm cases, referenced it. Anyone who went to law school has probably been teased with that line,
mhm.
especially their first semester in law school, and they go home for Thanksgiving, they meet with their high school friends or college friends or family, and you get teased because it is generally viewed as a derogatory phrase. You sleazeball lawyers, you ambulance chasers. There, we're gonna kill you all. That would right. How there's some joke about how's it go? So many lawyers at the bottom of the sea and there's not enough or whatever, right? Whatever it is. But the fact of the matter is, if you know the storyline in Henry VI, Dick the Butcher says that line it's a compliment to lawyers. They needed to kill all the lawyers because they were going to overthrow the king and I don't want to say lawfully elected. This is hundreds of years ago. The ruling power. They were going to unlawfully have a coup, and they needed to kill the lawyers in order to rid them of an obstacle, because the lawyers would interfere by upholding the rule of law.
That's right.
And there's no difference than what this administration is doing. Obviously, they're not actually killing us, thankfully, or imprisoning us yet. We'll see. You never
Thank
know.
God.
I doubt it,
So
but
far.
I'm not concerned in that sense. But without a doubt, trying to undermine us, trying to intimidate us, trying to get us off the playing field because we are an obstacle to what they want to do of illegality, unethical behavior, graft, grift, whatever word you want to use. So the only reason why I know I'm on that list is because I've been an adversary perceived as a legal aspect, as a lawyer representing people who have caused this administration trouble, which I would do if it was a Democrat administration as well.
Right. Which you've done. Right. Exactly.
Yes.
And I think one of the things I wanted our viewers tonight to really take away, and I think is always important in these roles, is how it affects them at home, in the normal life, because, some of these things seem really ephemeral in headline level, and they'll go, oh my God, it's terrible. But then they go back to eat because it doesn't seem to affect them. But whistleblowers have a specific value to our democracy. And your job at guiding that through, and more importantly, to part of about clearance and why your clearance matters. Would you explain to our viewers how you in that role without clearance are affected, and how that affects them at home?
Right. Well, the first thing, and I do think this is an issue within our country right now, in the notion of, for the most part, if so many people live paycheck to paycheck, they're not focused on things that don't impact them. Understandably,
Mm-hmm.
you gotta take care of your family first,
Mm-hmm.
and so if it doesn't impact you, you're not paying attention. What we're talking about with the rule of law, it impacts everybody, but you might not yet feel it, unfortunately.
Right.
Which is the importance for all these things that we're trying to do. And it always reminds me of the famous just post World War II poem about, they came for the socialists. I didn't say anything because I'm not a
Mm-hmm.
socialist. They came for the communists. I didn't say anything. I'm not a communist. They came for the Jews. I didn't say anything because I'm not Jewish. And then they came for me, and there was no one left to say anything. That's
That's right.
why this is so important. So my security clearance, and I think you really accurately captured it in the article. I'm one of a small number, who knows what the number is, small number of lawyers, especially in the employment field,
Mm-hmm.
who has never been with the federal government, doesn't represent a major defense contractor, and I'm working on commercial classified projects. I get access to classified information because my clients are CIA case officers whose identity is secret, or relationship affiliation with the CIA is secret, or they are FBI agents or Homeland Security agents who are operating in a classified environment, and something happens in their career that they require legal assistance. Now, it could be as a whistleblower, it could be a disciplinary action, could be a
Mm-hmm.
security clearance investigation, could be testifying before Congress. There are often times where I will bring individuals, federal employees, up to meet with members of Congress and their staff, and their agency may not know about it. Maybe they do, and it could be a classified session. And certainly a lot of the work that I do on what's called anomalous health incidents, a lot of that was in the classified sphere because of who's involved within the federal government, particularly the CIA, and the people who suffered from the loss of my security clearance was predominantly my clients and federal employees and, frankly, the American public. You know,
Right.
the government kept arguing, well, they're not stopping me from being a lawyer. That's true. I can still practice law. That was not impacted. And, the reality is I can still survive financially. I wasn't like making that much money off of the work that I was doing in the classified sphere, but
Right. Right.
but the work I was doing was helping not only those who might be adverse to this government or
Mhm.
administration, and those can be distinct, but a lot of the work I was doing was helpful, frankly, to this government and this administration because I help individuals get their security clearances or get through a disciplinary process who are working for the Trump administration in
Yeah.
senior level positions. So it's sort of one of those, they struck at me, but they actually stabbed themselves at the same time.
Well, once upon a time, Donald Trump got on the phone and made a phone call to Ukraine, and we were told one narrative. And as you know, sometimes now with him and Witkoff, they have private conversations. We don't even know what they're saying. But there is at least a process by which those phone calls were monitored. And one of those cases wound up at your desk. And it actually wound up kind of becoming a big deal. And I live in Ukraine, so I know a little bit about this case. But let's spell that one out for our viewers, especially the angle you had it.
Yeah, sure. So July of 2019 was this infamous, perfect call in air
Perfect
quotes
call.
between Zelensky and President Trump, where President Trump essentially tried to, bribe or blackmail President Zelensky that if you want more military weaponry
Hmm.
that for your conflict, then you need to investigate Hunter Biden and Joe Biden and activities that were happening in and around Ukraine. Now, most people may not realize this, but when the President of the United States has a conversation with a foreign leader, there are usually other people in the room. There are advisors listening in, at least maybe to both sides of the call, perhaps just one side, but it's not generally a one-on-one call. I mean, for one thing, there
Right.
sometimes needs to be translators, obviously.
Sure.
I don't know. Zelensky, obviously, for anyone who's ever seen him, he speaks English well enough that he might not have needed a translator, but, you still want to function in your native language because it's easier. But
Right.
when our president talks to a foreign leader, depending on what the topic is, not only are people in the White House involved in the National Security Council, but then that information gets disseminated to other federal employees inside different agencies who have a relationship to whatever the issue might be, right? So
Hmm.
if he had been talking about corn or I think what is wheat over there? I'm trying to remember whatever,
Yeah. Yeah.
farm wheat, whatever's over there, right? If it had been a conversation about wheat instead of military, people in the agriculture department would be briefed on the call so that they
Right.
can implement whatever needed to be done.
Right.
In this case, people within the intelligence community and the defense community were briefed about the call. Now, people inside the White House were significantly concerned, right? I have represented, and people know these names, Alex and Yevgeny Vindman, now Congressman Yev Vindman. Alex Vindman is running for Senate in the state of Florida. They were both NSC staffers. Yev Vindman was a lawyer on the NSC. Alex Vindman testified. They were both military officers at the time
Hmm.
in the Army. Alex testified before the impeachment proceedings during the investigation. I have represented both of those gentlemen. They were both whistleblowers, but they are
Right.
not the whistleblower because they blew the whistle up their chain of command to John Bolton, who was the national security advisor. And Bolton was also incredibly concerned about the call. What can he do? Well, his boss is the president of the United States. He can't go any higher. And that's who the allegations, obviously, or concerns were against. So when people in the White House briefed other agencies, a federal employee in another agency inside the intelligence community was so concerned that they went to their general counsel's office and said, this, doesn't seem right. I don't think it's legal. And then ultimately filed a complaint with the Inspector General's office in the intelligence community, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, now Tulsi Gabbard as the DNI, back
Literally,
then
that's the
Joseph
last name I
McGuire.
just wrote on here, Tulsi.
Yeah. And so this complaint was filed in August of 2019 as what's called an urgent concern. That set a timeline in play that the IG had to determine within 14 days, did it meet the definition of urgent concern, which the decision was it did. That triggered a response that it had to go to the House and Senate Intelligence Committees, which it did not, because the acting DNI was instructed by the Justice Department and or the White House to not disseminate the complaint. Now, I was not, and you got this right in your storyline, and this is actually really important, I was not part of that effort at all in those first 5 weeks.
Right.
This was when nobody publicly knew this was happening at all. I learned about it about a month in by my then co-counsel, or later co-counsel, but a good friend of mine who was the primary lawyer who was trying to figure out what to do. Andrew Bukai's name. He's been my client because he was a whistleblower at the CIA himself. He's a colleague, he's a friend. We work together at whistleblower.org, where we both represent intelligence community and elsewhere, and all whistleblowers, quite frankly, private and public. And so when I came in, it was because the government had blocked the complaint from going to the committees. And this was about to, as word started to leak out that there was something funny going on about the aide and a whistleblower. So I came in, and I was just the more senior lawyer, quite frankly, and had more name recognition than Andrew. I mean, it just really comes down to as simple as that.
Yeah.
But we were jointly acting together at all times. And then the president declassified not only the summary transcript of the call, but the whistleblower complaint. So we had 3 objectives at that point. 1, we needed to make sure the complaint, which was filed lawfully, all rules were followed properly. No inappropriate leaking of classified information. This is not an Ed Snowden. This is not a Bradley Chelsea Manning situation. This is done the right way by the law. That's what whistleblower.org, in fact, makes sure of. That's one reason why I co-founded it, to make sure that would happen that way, because we want to protect national security in the United States. We're trying to strengthen it at the same time to protect it.
Right.
Now, so we make sure the information gets to the oversight committees. Achieved. We made sure that the whistleblower's identity remained anonymous. Achieved. We made sure the whistleblower was not retaliated against unlawfully. Achieved. That was it. No other objectives. Impeachment was not an objective that we were pursuing. It became the political consequence of us achieving the first 3 and only objectives. And the House took it, impeached, and then, of course, the Senate failed to convict, and the rest is obviously history, except in the mind of Donald Trump and whoever else is around him. Obviously my name, not Andrew's, thankfully, my name stuck in somebody's craw. And there were many other cases that I've been involved with against the Trump administration, against Donald Trump, against senior advisors close to him. I mean, I represented two of his secretaries of defense, one of his national security advisors, his staff secretary. I mean, a lot of senior people in the U.S. government from the first Trump administration, people who wrote books. That's part of what I do, get their books properly cleared.
Okay.
So that they can write about it. And all of them.
We had one on last night. We had Fred Wellman on, who was attacked by Mike Flynn.
And
He
of
praised
course,
you, by the way, to our audience last night.
Yeah,
He said, I love Mark.
Well, he should. I was his lawyer. Of course, when he got sued by Michael Flynn, the former DIA director, who I remember dealing with when he was director, and he got sued for defamation. This is part of the lawfare. The MAGA crowd uses the term. They're the ones who actually exploit it by filing all these really either baseless, sometimes frivolous, legally lawsuits to incur people to incur money costs, or to intimidate them into silence. And I represented Fred successfully, thankfully, or Olivia Troye, another former Trump administration official. She's still in litigation that Rick Grenell filed against her. We've beaten him back, I think, twice so far, but technically the case still exists, and we're waiting for a decision actually by a federal district court. So,
Well,
hopefully I answered the question. That was a long answer to a short question.
These are great. And also, I think for our viewers, this is valuable history parts that they get these like 8-minute distillations on CNN, and they have a pretty good knowledge of the overall case. But hearing it from someone inside, I think, is invaluable. I want to stick to the part about, especially the protecting national security, because one of my concerns, especially with Kash Patel, interfering with counterintelligence, and now we have a war with Iran. What could go wrong? When those channels become defective, what consequences, happen, or exactly what's on your desk? You're trying to prevent that. So let's talk about that part where the other, outlets that start revealing themselves become part of the playbook.
Right from the outset of this second Trump administration, he came in with guns blazing. Fires 17 inspector generals, starts putting in people who are sycophants, loyalists to him. One of the reasons why that Kristi Noem just got fired the other day as Secretary of Homeland Security, her own inspector general, who's been there for years, made it very clear, and this just came out recently, made it very clear that she and her leadership were interfering with his independent investigations, that they were refusing to share information, respond to inquiries. That's not how the system is designed to work. So right now, we have tremendous concerns about bringing whistleblowers to any, and I'm generalizing, any inspector generals. I mean, there are some that are still very good and trustworthy, but the system is broken at the moment because you can't trust it, because you don't know who's in the office that might be revealing information. So, for example, the whistleblower's identity from that first Trump impeachment, like I said, we protected the identity. We learned months after everything was done that the White House was leaking the name of who they believed was the whistleblower to the media. But the media, mainstream media, refused to go there and name the individual to their credit. I mean, and that I'm talking even, Fox News, would have been given this name and did not go public with it. I do not believe for a second, if that happened now, that Carolyn Leavitt wouldn't just literally go to the podium as the White House press secretary and just say the name and, amidst all sorts of derogatory adjectives, as well as give it to right-wing MAGA, journalists in air quotes.
Dropping addresses and giving it to Laura Loomer and the crowd.
Yeah.
Right.
I have no doubt that would happen. And that makes everything really, really difficult right now. And look, Congress is incredibly divisively partisan. I think I think things are starting to change now. And I work with Republican members of Congress and their staff all the time because, again, we're doing this nonpartisan manner. In fact, I had a conversation today with a council, a Republican council, and I made sure that something we have planned. I'm like, will the minority be there? Will the Democrats be there? Because we want that too. We want both sides at all times. In fact, and I tell you about how with the first impeachment, I wasn't in the case for the first 5 weeks. Yet, if you look in the MAGA conspiracy circles, I conspired with then Congressman Adam Schiff to fabricate the whistleblower, to craft the complaint, to make this all up. But I'm like, I wasn't even in the case yet, guys. So how am I making all of this up? In fact, the only member of Congress I was in touch with during the first Trump impeachment was a name that probably some of your listeners or viewers would know, Devin Nunes.
I remember
Congressman Devin Nunes, Republican chair of the HIPC, the House Select Committee on Intelligence, wasn't at the time because he was in the minority. But, he's the guy who runs Trump's media enterprise now.
That's right.
He was a friend. I worked with him on the Benghazi case, which you talked about in your article, representing the CIA whistleblowers who were in Benghazi, Libya, when our ambassador was murdered. And Devin was, and as far as I know, still is an ally. I've never had a falling out with the guy. I haven't talked to him in years. But he was I wanted to make sure, because the Democrats were in control at the time, that the Republicans knew everything the Democrats did. So today, where do we go? Can we trust certain divisive partisan members of Congress? That's a concern. Can we go to inspector generals? That's a concern. Can we go to the Office of Special Counsel, where whistleblowers normally would go, but Trump has fired the special counsel and gutted the staff? So there's a concern. And more so than I've ever seen in my 30 plus years of law practice representing whistleblowers, I have never seen as many lawyers inside the government come forward as a whistleblower than I have during this administration. And that actually complicates matters even more so.
Well, I want to draw on that because I want to hear about the Tulsi case in a second, and I know some of my friends were already very ramped up to hear about the Havana syndrome, but I want to compare some administrations in our modern time, because when I was just a radio guy doing music stuff, and my Facebook circle, it's like music people and national security impulse. I went after Dick Cheney. I got really obsessed with it on several layers, and the torture case was one of them. And what happened with Valerie Plame and Joe Wilson, who I both know, was important. And I miss Joe Wilson, by the way. And there we had similar problems back then, but not at this amplitude. And I think that that's really where we have to explain to our audience, or share with our audience, where this could keep going if we don't do that. So, if you were to look back at the founding of WikiLeaks and these other options, and during the Bush administration, how would you compare some of those? I mean, obviously Trump's out of control, but what do you remember back in the Bush administration era that gave precursor to what we have now? Some interference, games that were played in ways in which we didn't know about, black sites. We had whistleblowers who were talking about those crimes in particular. Would you draw some parallels between those administrations to show the arc?
I mean, there are always parallels, because one, bureaucracy. It's right. The U.S. government is like, a tanker trawler on the ocean, that's 1,100 feet long, right? You can't just hit the brakes, right? It takes like a mile for the damn ship to stop. So, that's why statutes are usually out of date, because technology moves so much quicker than Congress. I mean, now everything, a snail moves quicker than Congress right now. But there's always issues. And in every administration, I had to deal with cover-ups and conspiracies with a small c, type situation.
The real
right?
ones, yeah.
but it was usually never the White House. I mean, maybe the issues I dealt with had White House implications. I worked on Gulf War syndrome issues in the 90s. I worked on the anthrax vaccine in the 90s into the 2000s. These went from Democrat Bill Clinton administrations into George W. Bush administration. I worked on Espionage Act cases during all of those administrations for journalists who were caught up as witnesses or possible targets, as well as the intel officers who were being prosecuted. And each of those administrations would push the envelope a little bit more. What's so different now is that no matter how maybe a step that they would take across the line, the norms in place held. Everybody generally knew where the line was that they didn't want to cross from an ethical standpoint or a legal standpoint. Of course people did. And you know what? Sure. They got prosecuted, or they got fired, or they got disciplined in whatever way, shape, or form. This administration, even different from the first Trump administration, norms don't matter. I mean, we're hearing, just watch what's going on with Kristi Noem in the last few days. And anyone who's been on X the last 48 hours has seen story after story coming in about contracts that seem to have been inappropriately awarded, maybe illegally, contracts that were going to friends and former staffers. I mean, things that smell really bad. Certainly the appearance of impropriety is extraordinary. We'll see whether the criminality follows that. But this time period in most of our lifetime, I mean, I was born in the late 60s, so
I'm 2 years your junior. I was born in 69. So yeah, we have several administrations we've watched.
Yeah. My earliest memory, I do remember Nixon resigning in 1974. I remember Carter. I was telling somebody this yesterday. I remember, who was younger than us and had no knowledge of this. I remember Billy Beer. You remember that?
Of course, Billy Beer.
Right? The scandal that Billy Beer was in 1976, 77. And for those who don't know, Billy Carter was President Carter's brother. He was a mess. He was always in trouble, and he was always trying to make a buck. He did some business with Gaddafi in Libya, and he tried to brand a beer called Billy Beer. If you go on eBay, you can still find cans.
That's right.
I think they're even still full because it was a crappy beer. Nobody wanted to drink it. But he was a grifter. He was always trying to make money. And that was a huge, huge scandal 50 years ago, which you pale in comparison. President Trump's going online, hawking his son's book, hawking his wife's movie. I mean, are you kidding me? So today's world is so different than anything we have seen before. Can we find some parallels in history? Yeah, of course. We can find little pockets of, oh, yeah, that was similar, that scandal, this scandal. But it's not just a scandal.
It's like I said back then with Cheney, I said, if you don't stop him, there's going to be something worse. And I'll be honest, I was wrong that Trump wouldn't get the nomination in 2016. I really thought there was a part of the Republican Party that was like the way William F. Buckley hated the Birchers, that the conventional side would at least, make him a joke. And I was completely wrong on that. We'll get into that in a whole other conversation with someone. But when I see that I was correct about, if you don't hold Cheney and those around him accountable, there will be consequences later. This is it. This is the set of consequences by not upholding that standard.
I mean, it is fascinating to think back at that time and sort of almost yearn for those guys to be back now.
More manageable.
The lesser of two evils. And I mean, and Dick Cheney, fascinating character. In understanding history, Dick Cheney was President Ford's chief of staff when he took office from Nixon. He was the youngest chief of staff ever in our history, at least back then, at 35 years old. And until literally last week, maybe 2 weeks ago already, when former President Clinton testified before Jim Jordan's House Government Reform Committee, President Ford was the last president of the United States to ever appear before Congress other than in a State of the Union. And he voluntarily went in to go talk about his pardoning of Richard Nixon and why he felt he needed to do that. And Dick Cheney felt that the executive branch, had ceded too much power to the legislative branch, the Article I legislative branch. And he spent his career taking that power back. And that led us to where we are now, which is way, way beyond what even Dick Cheney wanted, because, of course, he and his daughter, Congresswoman Liz Cheney, have been, well, Dick's now dead, have been, staunch opponents of this administration. So literally, they went further than the Cheneys went, who were viewed as, super conservative. And
the worst case scenario was Dick Cheney until this.
I mean, it's amazing to see, but it's all about the disillusion of norms. What we have learned is how fragile our democracy is, that it's not necessarily built on bedrock. It's built on shale or whatever, which, looks strong, feels strong, but if you can find the weakness, if you hit it in that one spot, it just shatters, and then it weakens everything else that stems from it. And so if you disregard the norms and the adults are sort of no longer in the room, which is the phrase a lot of people say, and it's obviously generalizing because there are still lots of good people.
Or his daughter, who used to be at least one break on the system, and now she's not showing up.
Well, and that was the first administration. We heard about people who were including clients of mine, who would take documents off the president's desk or not bring them to him so he wouldn't sign them, and he didn't realize this. And that's exactly what Nixon's staff did to him as well, because he just moved on to different things. Now, in this administration, they bring those executive orders to him, and he signs them willingly, probably without having even read them.
If he did read them, we wouldn't understand them. So on this Tulsi Gabbard case, if you wouldn't mind, especially from your angle and how you see that the whistleblower cases operate, Kushner's name was ultimately revealed as part of why the mention was in there, and we don't obviously know in the public, how much was hidden in there. But how do you read that case that's obviously involving an adversary that's now passing intelligence to the Iranians? And that Tulsi Gabbard bypassed the channels in favor of Donald Trump's son-in-law.
So for those who don't know, to set this stage, so an intelligence community officer learned information as part of their job and was highly concerned about what they saw. On their own, they went to the Inspector General of the intelligence community, the same office we went to 6 years earlier. This was in March of 2025 that they went to this to file the complaint. By April, I think May 1st, give or take, of 2025, the complaint was formalized and an investigation was started. There was a determination by the acting IG that the complaint met urgent concern, but did not have the proper credibility. Now, what that means, it's a different word than what we normally would think of credibility. Are you credible? Are you not? Are you truthful? Or are you a liar? It's more about, could they determine sufficient enough information in this 14-day period as to whether it's true or not. And the determination was they just couldn't determine it one way or the other, predominantly because the complaint was in large part against Tulsi Gabbard, that Gabbard had blocked an intelligence agency from sharing intelligence, raw intelligence, to other agencies, to the other parts of the community, which was supposed to happen in the wake of 9/11, of allowing information to be shared, right? We didn't want to be in another situation where the CIA knew of hijackers inside the United States and didn't tell the FBI. So these guys never got caught before they boarded a plane in Boston and flew the plane into the World Trade Center or the Pentagon. So this information, the complaint was filed. Whistleblower.aid.org ultimately came in to help with it. Now, unlike the IC whistleblower in the first administration, we have not had authorized access to classified information. So we have had no access to classified information. So you mentioned Jared Kushner. That has been reported in the media through the media's sources, not us. And when the information was deemed urgent but not credible, that set a mechanism in place for, okay, how do we then get the information to the oversight committees? And the law requires that the government give us guidance on how to do it. If we ask for it to go to the committees, they're supposed to comply. And they didn't do that for 8 months until we finally went public that this happened, that this existed. And we are still waiting for guidance to be able to bring the whistleblower to members of Congress to be able to brief the members or their staff as appropriate about what the actual underlying intelligence is. And Tulsi Gabbard and her DNI office have blocked that from happening, even though she is one of the subjects of the allegation that she was the wrongdoer in the first place. And they, unlike the other examples, not only did they block it, but they blocked it from going to the full committee of the House and the Senate Intelligence Committees. They only gave it to what's called the Gang of Eight, which is the majority and minority leadership, as well as the chairs and the ranking members, minority chairs of the Intelligence Committee. So literally, Gang of Eight, 8 members, and they weren't given all the information. They were given a redacted version of the complaint, which we understand to be literally a page, so not detailed. And the administration invoked executive privilege to block the legislative oversight branch from understanding what even the allegations are. So this is yet another conspiracy. I don't know if it's a small c or a large c. It's at least a small one. But this is an example of how whistleblowers still can be stopped from engaging in their lawful activities because we're not going to cross that line into unlawfulness. You're not going to read about us, or see us on the news disclosing classified information. We are impeded. We are obstructed at the moment. And you asked about what does that send as a message? Well, what's the message? The message is to other whistleblowers: do you bother trying? Or do you bother trying the right way? Why don't I just be Ed Snowden and just illegally leak classified information, which I hope no one ever does. But if the system doesn't work the proper way, the alternative is the worse way, which hurts our country.
The espionage. Try to get air raid on my ears there. The fact that it creates a vulnerability, I think I really wanted to highlight to our friends, because I know they know I really like to focus on national security side. I said for years that our adversaries really don't think in red and blue. They think in basically destruction of who we are, a destruction of our institutions, the doubt in our systems, in our institutions, and for instance, some of the old KGB officers or the big chiefs like Avi Agians, who invented the Active Measures Department, they understood our vulnerabilities, and he said if the United States didn't have freedom of press, we would invent it for them. So that meant that the adversaries, not just Russia but China and now Iran, obviously to deal with, they know what our wiring is, and they know that the best thing they can do is get us to really, really undermine the various institutions we have. And we had the church committee, when we were young. You and I were little ones at the time. And they loved that we had the church committee. Now we had comeuppance about, intelligence operations. Now we wanted to play within the rules, and I actually have told my friends to start learning the rules of cat chess. And they, "What is cat chess?" Well, cats don't care about the rules. Yeah, that doesn't mean you stop playing. So that's what we're up against. I want to pivot for our friends to another area, especially because it still deals with the idea of Russia. Is what happened in Cuba with the sonic weapons and the Havana syndrome? Because that's an area
Right.
you've definitely been on.
Yeah, and I was working on the case before Havana, years before, uh, uh,
Hmm.
and which is why I never liked the term Havana syndrome, because it's a colloquialism that the media invented in order to easily just explain what it
Good
is.
good short handles on a big complicated thing. Yeah, exactly.
It's like the Spanish flu is a similar equivalent, and
Great
if anyone,
example.
right, anyone who knows the Spanish flu, which was from a century ago, the huge worldwide pandemic that killed millions and dozens of tens of millions of people, the Spanish flu probably originated in Kansas, United States,
Exactly.
but the first people who came forward with it were in Spain, because of transparency,
Right.
actually at the time, and so it got the monocle of Spanish flu, and the Spaniards will have to live that down for the rest of their lives, even though, or for history, even though it wasn't their fault. So
Right.
Havana syndrome is very similar in the sense that it first came to public light when diplomats our real foreign service officers, as well as Canadian foreign service officers, were impacted by something in Havana, Cuba in 2016. There were also intelligence officers who were impacted. Many of them are starting to come forward now for the first time in years. Catherine Herridge has been really pushing this issue and interviewing people who we had not publicly heard from before. I mean, I knew who these people were, but the public had not. But I had been working on this for an NSA victim from back in the 1990s, uh, who I had started represent around 2012, who had been impacted in a still classified location
Hmm.
in 1996 or so. Two NSA officers, for doing an operation, and they both developed a very rare form of Parkinson, and now both have unfortunately passed away. The first guy passed away back in like 2012,
Mm.
as I recall. And the suspicion was microwaves. In fact, the NSA gave me an unclassified memo in October of 2014 that said they had intelligence of a foreign adversary with a microwave weapon that could maim or kill, and was mostly being used on personnel. The allegation, they didn't have proof. And we never saw the underlying intelligence, even though I sued for it. We never got it because it was classified.
Hmm.
That it could be used at their personal domestic locations, their home, right? It wasn't targeting them at work. There were
Hmm.
cases at work, but it was predominantly targeting people in their homes, which meant their family members were being impacted. These weren't war zone countries. It wasn't like they're in Iraq or Afghanistan. They were in Vienna, Austria. They were in Frankfurt, Germany. They were in Caribbean countries. They were in the DC metropolitan area or Key West, Florida, and hit in their homes, which meant their spouses were hit at times, their children, including infants, were hit, their pets were hit. So,
Right.
and as this has happened, I would say a lot of the cases were in during the first Trump administration. And again, this is not a partisan issue. Let me just make that
Oh
clear.
yeah, exactly. Very much so.
All right. I can trace it back to the Eisenhower administration, and it's a continued. The Soviets / Russians have been using microwaves against us for decades.
Right.
Anybody can just Google the Moscow signal and see that for more than a decade, something like 15, 17 years, the Soviets were bombarding our embassy in Moscow with low-level microwaves that the CIA was monitoring daily without telling the State Department personnel, including our ambassador, that this was happening. And in fact, I was even contacted recently by someone who served in the embassy and whose family members have died very young of rare forms of cancer. And that has happened to some of our ambassadors as well. I have been pushing this for years that we should be researching what happened to our diplomatic staff from in the 1960s and 70s. How many of them died of a rare form of cancer? How many of them died at a younger age than you would have suspected? It's not conclusive proof, but it would be anecdotal if there was a statistical anomaly, which, for example, I've been told that the CIA has a statistical higher number of employees with Parkinson's than other agencies do. Why is that?
Yeah, well,
I don't know. Could be a good reason, but that's something to think of. So where are we? Anomalous health incidents, AHIs as we call them now. I think we were at a big juncture in 2024 when I testified before Congress in the aftermath of a 60 Minutes episode about one of my FBI clients. It's a great episode. And 60 Minutes and The Insider and Der Spiegel have really been pushing this issue to their credit. And there's more to follow. But we lost momentum with the change of the administration, not because it was the Trump administration, just change of administration, right? The focus gets shifted.
Sure.
It's back now because so much more information has been coming out. More people have been speaking, especially from the intelligence community. There were these allegations that we've purchased a device. You talked about it in your piece. They purchased a device through the Department of Homeland Security. I had heard about this for years. I knew this effort was underway. I thought it was just a matter of time before we would get one. Apparently, it's been reported that it came from Russian criminals, and who would have been able to piece the pieces together. And I think we're on the verge of getting more information out. The current chair, Crawford of the House Intelligence Committee, Republican, has been really outspoken as an ally and advocate about this. He has called for the Director of National Intelligence, here we go again, Tulsi Gabbard, to rescind the 2025 Intelligence Community Assessment, which basically says there's nothing to see here. We have no proof.
The smallest one we had in forever. They don't come out every year, but this one became the smallest one. I have them on PDFs, and it's not that many pages.
Yeah. And, that there's no foreign adversary involved. I will tell you this, having had authorized classified access, I can't obviously say what I know, never would.
Sure.
I will say the government is lying to the American public. There's no doubt in my mind, and it is at heart the CIA. That is the entity, again, not politically. It's not a partisan issue. It's been Republican, it's been Democrat. The CIA is covering up the evidence that it has, and other agencies are starting to push back against it. And I think it's just a short matter of time, actually, before this sort of bubbles to the surface, to come up with an analogy. The submarine is going to have to surface soon because it's leaking. It's leaking air a lot.
Well, I could keep you here forever because these people love this, and what I'd rather do is have you come back more often when we can do this, so we could we could digest, learn, and build. But here's the final thought for tonight, and you can take as much time on this as you want. So the courts, we clearly understand that we had this part, and I started before you came on tonight. We the people, in order to form the United States of America, in order to form a more perfect union. This we the people. But then there are three specific branches that are supposed to keep balance and do their part to make sure we keep this. The Congress is basically forfeited its ground entirely to the executive. So thus we turn to the judicial. The highest court we could do a whole story on tonight, but we have the courts still in the battle. And that's where I want you to take this before we go, and take as much time as you want. The battles in the courts now are where our democracy is being saved in many ways. How do you read the courts holding up, or the fights in the courts holding up, so that our viewers walk away with something to at least be, a little reality check plus some silver lining?
The rule of law is alive and well within our third branch of government, the judiciary. Legislative branch, fully agree with you. They have ceded authority. They have walked away. It's really disturbing, especially because constitutionally, they are actually supposed to be the stronger branch of government.
Number one.
Why they're in
First
Article
thing
1.
They're Article 1, exactly. We the people.
Right? And hopefully at some point in time, they will come back, because we, the people, benefit by co-equal branches of government exerting their authority in check over one another.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't mean they can't cooperate with one another, political party. Of course they can. That makes it sometimes even work better at
That's
times.
right.
Not now. I mean, you got two real Republicans in both Congress, House and Senate in control, and the White House, and yet we're at a standstill completely.
Right.
The judiciary has really been a shining star.
Good.
There are exceptions. There are always exceptions.
Sure.
My biggest concerns
Eileen
were
Cannon. Hold on.
that is definitely one of them. My biggest concern was that we weren't going to see the judiciary fight, that we were going to see the executive branch, and I still think this is going to happen, frankly, because I don't think we're anywhere close to the bottom of where we're going to be. I mean, there's 3 years left. We'll see what happens after the midterms, but that doesn't, even if it went Democrat, doesn't mean it's going to be better, to be perfectly honest. It could be a nightmare, actually worse, but we'll see. But putting that aside, most court cases have actually ruled against the administration, in part because they've destroyed the norms and they've gone over their skis and pushed the envelope much further than anyone ever would have done before. Judges are holding Justice Department lawyers in contempt or threatening it countless times because of the flip-flopping that they're doing, as well as perceived lack of candor, lying to the courts. They are really starting to get fed up, and these are Democrat and Republican appointed judges. It shouldn't make a difference which one they are, but it helps paint a picture. These are Trump appointed judges from the first administration who have been routinely ruling against him. Now, at some point in time, like I said, I do think the administration is going to disobey outright. We've seen a little bit, but sometimes you could chalk it up to incompetence. Sometimes you can chalk it up to miscommunications. We haven't had an outright, I refuse to obey. In fact, I thought that might happen in my security clearance lawsuit when the judge ordered them to restore or reinstate my access to classified information. I actually thought that they were not going to do it. Thankfully, they did, to their credit. But at some point in time, when probably the Supreme Court rules against the administration and Trump will pull his favorite president's line of Andrew Jackson of "you and what army," essentially, are going to enforce your ruling. That's when we'll be in a constitutional crisis. But up to this point, the vast majority of rulings have gone against the administration, including even with the Supreme Court when it comes to substantive rulings. There have been a lot of smaller rulings on the shadow docket. There have been a lot of reinstatement of stays of injunction that have been put in place by lower courts. But on the substantive levels, like the tariffs case we saw recently, Supreme Court ruled against that the president had exceeded his authority. Or when due process was at stake, they have held in favor of due process, like in immigration cases, in the Abreu Garcia case, that you can't just deport someone without due process, similar to when you talked about the torture cases, similar to the Gitmo, the Guantanamo Bay prisoners, detainees, where they were entitled to habeas relief,
Yeah,
contrary to the Bush administration's belief.
16 years ago, when I ran Veracity Radio as an outlet for my Cheney Watch work, I interviewed Colonel Morris Davis was my first guest, and he was actually one of my guests in the last few weeks. And to bring him back was an honor because he's a good buddy. And I asked him back then, could you explain to everyone why this matters so much? Because what I told listeners was, it's not the person's name that I'm worried about. Abu Zubaydah is an example. It's that when we cease to honor that part of our basically legal legacy, we return back to the age of the imperial king that could just do whatever they wanted to do, and that due process was really what makes America great.
Yeah, and to me, hypocrisy is the enemy of the good. And there's a lot of enemies of the good, but hypocrisy in particular. So if we looked at waterboarding, and I can totally understand why they were waterboarding some of these folks, doesn't mean I agree with it. In fact, the fact that we prosecuted Japanese officials for waterboarding in World War II, that's all I need to know of why are we waterboarding. I mean, we upheld the rule of law to set the standard for what crossed the line into war criminal activity, and yet then we engage in it. It's the whole notion of the ticking bomb, so that somehow that justifies, doing horrible things to people because the bomb countdown is clicking, closer to zero and the bomb's going to go off. And those are things we can all understand. But we have to make that decision at some point in time with, more often than not, the bomb's probably not ticking. And so are we going to justify doing X to countless people for no reason to get to the one person? And, obviously you make the consequences more serious, then people are more willing to do it. But thankfully we're generally not there. But the courts, again, to finish, they're right now, they are our shining beacon, including the Supreme Court, even though there are certain justices where it's like, is there anything that the president can't do wrong at any given time? And that's a shame, but look, there's always been someone like that on the court.
True.
Historically. But we are really seeing so many judges step up. And for those who might have watched last week's 60-minute episode, where so many of these judges who are standing up for the rule of law are facing threats.
That's actually the back of my mind was that question right there. I'm glad you bring it up. Talk about the threat on judges. Thank you. You said it, even though it's on my list here.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's a judge in New Jersey. Her son was murdered by a lawyer, an activist lawyer who had some mental illness as well. I mean, that's generally where it comes from. Also, unfortunately, that's a separate topic. Sure. He found her home address and was able to go and shot her husband and killed her 20-year-old son. These judges, though, they're receiving threats after threats. They're being doxxed. They're getting pizzas sent to their home, oftentimes in the name of the son, the murdered son of this judge. I mean, that's how horrible some of these people are. I mean, I experienced death threats. I had a guy prosecuted for threatening my life in the first Trump impeachment timeframe. He went to jail for over a year. I got swatted, which is, someone calls in a fake call to the police department that there's bombs at the house, there's hostages, and they literally send a SWAT team with, automatic weapons to your house. Thankfully nothing happened when it happened to me. But doxing, all that. And these are all really dangerous times. And the judges are not generally equipped to handle this. The Marshal Service, which is a arm of the executive branch, not the judicial branch, is maxed out. And a lot of these cases, it's hard to prevent or predict the lone gunman who just shows up out of the blue. Exactly. So, I mean, it is a really dangerous time right now. for those who are willing to stand up. And I have a lawsuit against the president right now, still involving January 6th, because the argument is he stoked the flames. I mean, again,
Right.
this is the difference of the norms, right?
Right.
Instead of condemning what happened in Charlottesville, with the Proud Boys and the others, he's like, stand tall, whatever his comments were. No, that's never how it's been. You don't use rhetoric that can inflame people who have mental illness, or just prone to violence. And I'm not saying that everybody associated with January 6th was either of those two
Right.
categories. There was a lot of people who were just exercising their First Amendment right. They didn't do anything illegal. They were just down there protesting. That's perfectly fine. That is America. But when you have a president of the United States and those around him like Stephen Miller, Carolyn Levitt, Stephen Chung, who are flaming the flames in a way that sends mixed messages when it should be a
Right.
clear message of, we do not condone violence. We stand by the rule of law. What the judges say is what we will abide by. And when you don't do that, that's how democracy collapses. But to end on the high note, right now, the judiciary is the shining beacon of light. I applaud these judges, both Republican and Democrat appointed ones, for upholding the rule of law.
And I want to remind all of our friends to follow your account and make sure that they're paying attention. And again, I really appreciate when you go live with Brian and get to kind of riff on what's happening in the news, because we need, I like this platform for that reason, that the corporate media has failed to really elevate the quality of information up for different reasons I won't get into. And this audience is just one of the many examples of people who are dying to find out what's really going on so they can make informed decisions. So thanks for being here, and I hope you'll come back.
Thank you, Chris. I really appreciate you focusing on this, and I will happily come back. And please stay safe where you are.
I have a bad habit of that. I'm not staying in America at a school, a grocery store, or any of the places that get shot up on a regular basis. So we're just dealing with regular Russian problems. But we'll see
Aren't
you
we
soon, my
all?
man. Aren't we all? See you soon, my man. Appreciate you. And
Take
to everyone
take
else,
care.
thank you for joining us tonight. This will be on a replay. You can pass out to your friends, and we will have tomorrow night. Phil Air will be joining us to talk about why he's running for Congress and all the work he's done here in this country. Plus, really, we have a lot of programming coming up just like this that I think you're not going to want to miss. So, you know how we do this. Slava Ukraini, Heroim Slava. God bless America. I pizdet Rossiyской Federacji.